Big global news. Can a Greek tragedy be averted? The prospect of a deal between Greece and its creditors began to look more likely again today. A Greek government official says that creditors have started to draw up a technical level agreement, meaning politicians still need to review and agree on the terms. Greece needs, of course, more aid just to meet its debt obligations due to previous bailouts. Everyone is waiting for June the 5th to see if Greece will make a payment due to the International Monetary Fund. Officials say it could miss the date and avoid a default, but only if it lumps 4 installments together and pay them by the end of the month. But that's cold comfort for Greek Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis. Anti-austerity protests in Athens show the scale of the problems the government is facing. It can't keep to its election promises over reform and satisfy its lenders. Greece's debt pile stands at 340 billion euros. That's more than 170% of its GDP. With 26% of working age people still unemployed, the fight for survival isn't getting any easier in Greece. Well, let's discuss. I'm joined by George Glynos from ETM Analytics. Great to have you with us again, George. So let's just do the history lesson briefly. How did we get to this point? So Greece had bailouts, then the elections came, things were meant to change, a long line of talks. How do you see it?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, you have to, in fact, go back a couple of decades, but you go back a decade and really it's a profligate government. It's interest rates that were too low for a structure, the structure of that particular economy, a lot of spending, consumption on debt. It's just basically debt. Debt was the big problem. It surfaced very strongly post-2008 in the crisis when GDP collapsed. And not just in Greece, but the world over. Suddenly, tax collections collapsed and it all came to the fore. So we had a process of major reforms that got implemented in Greece between 2009 and now. And I would have to say it's probably the biggest austerity drive in modern history. Which Greece has accomplished. It's quite an achievement in and of itself that it's done what it's done. I think no modern economy can claim that they've reduced government spending to the extent that the Greeks have. The problem is that whilst they've been cutting their expenditure, their GDP has fallen at the same time. So in terms of the ratios of debt and repayments to GDP, they've kind of stayed the same or if not gotten worse. Purely because GDP was running away from them whilst they were busy cutting their government expenditure. So it was a vicious cycle. It spiraled down. But towards the end of last year, we were stabilizing and things were looking a whole lot better. And in fact, I was quite hopeful at the time that the existing government, the new democracy government under Mr. Samaras, was going to be able to pull through and organize an early exit from the bailouts, and Greece would have continued on its recovery path because we saw it post a positive GDP growth rate in the fourth quarter. So
austerity was actually working to some extent.
Well, it worked to the extent that it helped Greece shift its expenditure to the point where it was living within its means. So to the extent that it did that, well, they weren't climbing out of the hole yet, but at least they were learning to live within the boundaries of what Greece could produce in terms of tax collections at the time. There's a lot of improvements that can happen on all sorts of fronts. Now, all of a sudden, though, we had the elections that took place earlier this year. We had a whole new government voted into power, and this government is led by a very socialist, very left-leaning leader, accompanied by a Marxist economist who became their Minister of Finance. And the two of them combined had very different ideas of how Greece should extricate itself from this problem. So they wanted less of the austerity. They wanted a more forward-looking growth type of approach. And of course, when you're fronting the money, you want the numbers to add up. So the creditors didn't really like that approach. And so we've landed up in a 5-month or 4-month battle of ideologies to try and see how best to pull Greece out of this slump. And it's culminated to this point. Now we've run out of time and we've run out of money, and Greece effectively has until the 5th of June before it starts to renege on debt repayments to the IMF.
Okay, so let's look at what's underway now. But before that, Alexis Tsipras, the Prime Minister, seems, and tell me if I'm correct, to have softened his stance. He does want the bailout funds. He does want to compromise a little to keep that money coming in with the rest of Europe. We've been seeing pictures behind of protests in Greece, because a lot of people still clinging to that idea that we need to reject austerity.
Yeah.
Do they understand that if Greece leaves, the consequences could be worse? More poverty,
actually,
in fact.
Francis, I wish people had never invented the word austerity, because if we had to replace the word austerity with sustainability reforms, it just sounds a whole lot different.
Yeah.
It sounds logical. Well, let's put in reforms that make us sustainable. I mean, that's what austerity is at the end of the day. But like I've said, and I've said this on many occasions, politicians, and it's not just in Greece, politicians the world over are only allowed to do what their economy allows them to do. They can only do and implement as much as their economy allows. So if the economy has no money, if the tax collections aren't there, well, I mean, with all the goodwill and the noble intentions in the world, it just doesn't help your cause to want to be, very expansive in your monetary policies. If you cannot afford it, you can't afford it. In the case of Greece, Mr. Tsipras has learnt through the course of the past 4 months that it's not as simple as just coming up with fanciful ideas. It may have been easy to do that while he wasn't in power, but when he is and when he comes into power, the reality of the situation has probably hit him like a freight train, in that the money's not there. He's not in a position of huge bargaining power. He does need the help of the Eurozone. If he wants the help of the Eurozone, he does need to listen to what their expectations are, and he has to at least meet some of them. And I think that's been the process. It's been a growing up process for Mr. Tsipras. I think he's matured as a politician and as a leader through the course of the past 4 months.
Well, he's been at the coalface of
He's been at the coalface, and I suspect at the end of the day, Greece is going to come up with a compromise solution, but it's not going to look anything like what they promised the electorate when they got voted in.
Well, what about is there goodwill in Europe for this deal to go ahead among high-level people at the IMF and the EU? Do they want to save Greece? It seems like they have tried to put Tsipras in his place to some extent after those election promises. I'll bring Europe in line, but they wanted to push back. But is there ultimately political will to save Greece?
Look, they had to put the Greek government in their place. They had to teach Mr. Tsipras that he can't just bandy around loose, build expectations in the way that he did, purely because there's a moral hazard attached to that. If they didn't, others, such as Portugal, might expect the same. So there would be more to this than that. Also remember, you mentioned the number earlier, 340 billion euros is a fortune of money to put at risk, which no taxpayer really wants to bear the burden of. So of course they definitely do want to find a solution, both for political and for financial reasons, and I suspect that they will. It's just a matter of a few days now.
If there's a little spanner in the works, if things go wrong, can Greece ever go it alone?
Oh, they could.
What does that look like when nobody in the world trusts you?
Well, the way it looks like, look, many countries have defaulted on debt and many countries have bounced back. It really is how you manage the process thereafter. And you have to be fairly strict with a lot of your policies. The central bank wouldn't be allowed, for example, to just print up their currency, or you would land up in a Zimbabwe type situation with hyperinflation. That would be even more destructive. So you definitely can go it alone. The question is whether or not the Greek people would want to tolerate what would follow immediately after the decision to go it alone, because a default comes with it, brings with it a whole lot of isolation and probably even more economic pain in the immediate aftermath. After that, one could argue that things look a whole lot better and they've wiped the slate clean of debt, and therefore the debt burden's not there, and you can adopt policies that aren't as austere. That may be true, but you've got to accept the fact that it doesn't come for free, and immediately post a default, there would be a huge amount of pain.
Chaos. Thank you so much for your time this evening. That was George Glynos from ETM Analytics, and it looks like that situation will be avoided. I will bring you any news on that pending deal, it looks like, as soon as it becomes available.